Welcome back to Dirty Pretty, the space where we own our feelings, honor our experience, share unfiltered truths, and talk shit, all through a lens of love. Today's guest, Lindsay Jerome, wants you to know that to shift the direction of your life, it's going to require that you shift your energy. Lindsay envisions a world that is driven less by achievement and money and more by making a meaningful contribution to the collective. She is a modern mystic, energy worker, an intuitive guide who helps women transform their energy so they can transform their lives. Combining her intuitive gifts with pattern interrupt coaching, embodiment practices, and energy healing, Lindsay offers a holistic heaven and earth approach to help women go from stuck and stagnant to growing and flowing. Come find the way through by shaking up stagnant energy, breaking free of harmful cycles, and get moving in the direction of your most fulfilling life. Welcome.
Hi. Hi, everyone.
So happy to have you. Something I just want to say at the forefront is I am very lucky and honored to have had the experience to work with Lindsay. And something that I said before we hit record and having this conversation was working with her felt like it jostled something loose inside of me and gave me such a different and more well-rounded, I would say, perspective of myself. And she is very intuitive in inviting in the conversation of the individual, them to be their most authentic self, embrace themselves fully. And that's exactly what you did for me. So thank you.
I appreciate that, Shannon. Thank you for saying that.
Of
What an honor
course.
to work with you.
Thank you.
I feel so flattered and honored to be invited onto the platform, this virtual space. So I'm very, very honored to be invited on, and I'm super excited to, yeah, go with the flow, as you said.
So something very interesting about Lindsay that I haven't had a direct encounter with is, all of the titles and all of the hats that you wear, right? There's modern mystic, there's energy worker, there's intuitive guide, there's pattern interrupt coaching, right? There's so much depth and breadth to your work. It's very layered and multifaceted. So out of all the things that you could have professionally chosen, why is wearing all of these hats super congruent and right on point for you?
That's a beautiful question. I love this because as being part of the, Yana Robinson mastermind that we were all in, including me and Shannon, there was a lot of focus on owning the individual things that you bring and how those could be even so different, even potentially, contrasting or contradicting in who you are and how you want to show up. And how do we own all of that? And how do we let all of that come to see the light of day instead of just, shoving some of them away, keeping some of them in the dark, almost like skeletons, whether we're ashamed of them or whether they feel too contradicting of what we've already put out there. And I think for most of the first half of my life, I was very, as most people, I would say, at least in our society, at least with the parents and family lineage that I had, but very like linear thinking, very, logical base, very masculine, very achievement forward, and it was more about what would be considered successful through the eyes of others rather than defining that and what that means for me individually and what I actually want and desire. So because of that, it led a very like mundane, very linear, one track life that I was just like, I feel like there's so much more to bring than just this. There's so much more life to give. There's so much more life to live. And I think what really shifted in the last few years, recently, would be like owning how creative I was and am, like, and super sensitive, like that part gets so shut down so early, and kids and women specifically, especially men. And it's just not really honored or honed in the way that it should be. It's not nurtured in the way that it needs to be for kids to grow up and feel like that's a safe, quote unquote, thing to be. So the shift really happened in the last few years when I was like, okay, I'm actually so much more creative than this. And I can't be, putting that in the closet, leaving that on the back burner, leaving that last because every other quote unquote responsible thing is taking priority in my life, whether that's working a mundane job to pay the bills, whether that's, um, even, grocery shopping, meal prepping, all these things that are like very structured and routine and rigid. I was like, how do I make space for that part to come through? And once I really got through a lot of shame attached to that, about being like pretty ungrounded and pretty creative and neurodivergent and really, really different in the path that I had, it was so unconventional. Like when I would look at other people's, it really allowed me to just own that part better and bring that out more and just feel more and more confident in that the more that I nurtured it, which led to just many different kind of paths, like I guess, that opened up through creativity, just all the possibilities and all the opportunities that can come if we don't look at life so limited, through that, small, narrow scope of this is what I need to do. I need to go to school. I need to go to college. I need to graduate, get that degree, get that successful job, find that partner, build that family, have that white picket fence, lifestyle that a lot of people eventually get to and are still super unhappy and dissatisfied with their life and incredibly unfulfilled, and so missing that spirit or that soul aspect or that creative part of their life, and they don't realize that that might be what's missing, which can be simple at bringing in that day to day. Like it can be taking 5 or 10 minutes aside to just be able to contribute to that so that these other parts of yourself don't feel neglected or abandoned or not nurtured. Like, so I think seeing myself through that lens and perspective and really just not denying it anymore, and also just starting to work through any shame that was attached to it from my upbringing, allowed like so many, like the floodgates to open and the doors and the possibilities. And I started getting a lot more excited about what my life would look like if I created it in the way that I actually truly wanted it and not what everyone else wanted or thought it should look like. And that allowed me so much more creativity, so much more freedom, so much more, fulfillment and joy. It allowed me to flow more through the days rather than just being so rigid and structured and bogged down by that, like we discussed before. Yeah. So I would say starting to kind of like own that part allowed for me to show up in so many different roles or quote unquote titles or labels that actually started to feel eventually true. Of course, they'll always shapeshift. And we talked about that prior to this, just about how often that really truly morphs. Because when you're, living in spirit or you're, coming from that soul place, it's channeled moment to moment, which means it changes every single present moment, and this one and this one and this one. And so it's like, what am I right now is not what I was 10 seconds ago, was not what I was 10 days ago, 10 months, 10 years. And that's okay. Like, what is the soul and what is the heart asking for right now in this moment? Like, and let that be different every single time. Don't box yourself in. Don't limit yourself, because that's what kind of ends up usually being that reason for people to feel like something's missing, is that they've just limited themselves a little too much, and boxed themselves in, or society box themselves in, box them in, or their parents, or, whatever beliefs and conditioning is there. It just puts a lot of restriction on the mind and definitely on the spirit, boxes the spirit in. Yeah, I think that answers it. I went on a tangent.
Meanwhile, you're talking and I'm like, I can't have my eyes closed the entire time she's talking, because that is how I authentically respond to you. Even when we were doing our conversation, just to give a little bit behind the scenes, and I hope it's okay. And if not, I'll take this out afterwards. But like in our conversation, I wasn't looking at you a lot of the time. A lot of the time I was offline and you were doing work while I wasn't even communicating with you. And I fell asleep. It was so deep. And there was so much that came through for me. And that's what happens to me when you talk, and you're in your essence is what I would call it. Is like it's almost like a trance comes over. And if you close your eyes, like you can feel the words like resonating with you real time. And so as you're talking, typically when I'm doing this conversation with someone, and maybe I think most times when anyone's having a conversation with anyone, you're listening to take in the information. But in the interview, I have to find a point to like, okay, what am I going to go in at next? And everything you're saying, I'm like, I could do, I could, but also this and what about all that? So It is true that Lindsay pointed out prior to this conversation, and this happens very often for any of you that are watching and listening. I say this all the time. Prior to hitting record, so many golden nuggets are born that really spawn this conversation, which is great. But prior to hitting record, we're trying to, linearly, I guess, say, according to you, right, into the way you phrased it, which was beautiful, identify how to title what you professionally are. And there just is, you're so morphologic, right? All of the things that we mentioned at the top of this, right? Pattern interrupt coaching, like all these things. It's whatever foot you're putting forward that day, because you are very complex in the most creative of ways. And so the thing that I heard in there that was really fascinating for me, because I heard myself in what you were saying, and something I have to just point out or share with you is that you telling me that you came from a dominant masculine perspective, this person I see now does not give me that. Like, I have goosebumps even just saying that to you. And that is a testament to how diligent and devoted you were to self-actualizing, to feeling into what is actually most congruent for you, and being the person that walks their talk by really thinking about what is the contribution I want to receive from myself and then also contribute to the collective. So coming back to what I was saying about the masculine, and you pointed out, there tends to be a creative cap on children because of the way culture has notoriously been operating in binary rigidities, black and white thinking, polar opposites, right? Extremes. What was it that allowed you to see that diving into your creativity was the thing that, and I'm going to just paraphrase, you can put whatever, moniker you want on it, but allowed you to break open and see that that's what you needed? Because as sure as we're sitting here, I can imagine that there's someone listening or on the other end of the screen going, that's me. I am a dutiful task checker. And I don't feel like there's any time in my day for creativity. It's jumping from one thing to the next thing. And that's where I find my satisfaction is how much can I achieve every day? Because that's what they envision represents them. So how did you get to the point of realizing, whoa, I need more creativity?
I would say, and it wasn't obvious at the beginning, it shows up in a multitude of different ways for different people. It often is in the spiritual community talked about as the dark night of the soul, being in a rock bottom, being at like your lowest, right? So that's usually the motivator for people to start actually changing their life because they can't tolerate this anymore. They know something has to change. They know something has to shift because wherever they're at is so intolerable living day to day, whether that's how they feel, whether that's how they're living, whether that's how they're thinking, all of the above, that they're like, something's off. Something's really, really off. Something's really imbalanced. And I can't exactly put my finger on what that is, but I know intuitively that I'm not feeling myself or I'm not feeling my best. And I know what that feels like, or at least I know what better feels like. And this is not that. So what's going on here that I need to shift or change to get back to that or a even better place than I was. And I would say for me and Lee actually talked about this.
Lee is our friend. For people watching that don't know, Lee is our friend.
Yes. Lee is someone who was also in Yana Robinson's mastermind with us. I believe that's how we all met. And she's incredible. Hopefully it's okay to credit her in here. I know she's
totally
hopefully coming soon. But we both actually worked with her with branding. And, when I was on a Zoom call with her, we had to touch base on like, what's my personal story? And where did I start and where did I get to? And why is this my purpose? And how is this all connected? And what's the through lines there? So we went through it and it's in my brand book now. But I would say that's where things really started. When I go back in time to that part in the story, that's where I was like, absolutely nothing in my life is fitting. I want to burn all this shit to the ground. Nothing feels like me. I don't know who I am. I'm chronically depressed. Like, I'm super anxious. I don't like anything that I'm doing. I don't believe in most of the stuff I'm doing. And who am I? This almost like that midlife or quarter life crisis that people had, I was having in my second year of college. That was like really when I started like hitting that point where I was in nursing school, which now I look back and I'm like, oh my gosh, like that doesn't feel like me at all. Like, yes, health and wellness and betterment and self improvement and
Mhm.
personal growth and personal development. Absolutely. But it wasn't holistic enough. Like, and what started to happen, and I'm not sure what happened, first, it's like chicken or egg. But at some point in my second year of college, I was like really hitting a wall. And you couldn't tell. My grades were great. I was on the dean's list fall and spring semester. And I was so, so depressed, right? Like, I was like, what's going on? Like, I can't figure this out. I've never dealt with mental illness to my knowledge up until then. I was privileged enough to really not understand that realm at all because I hadn't ever felt that I was struggling until then. Which is interesting because if you look into like, my lineage on both sides, my mom's side and my dad's side, and even my immediate family, there's a lot of mental like illness. There's a lot of mental health going on there
Mhm.
that many people have struggled with. So for me, it was like, I didn't really see that coming, although I knew genetically there was consequences to that. Like, and I knew there was potentials there. And I just never had dealt with it before, or struggled with it. So for me, it was like, what is this feeling? Like, I know that I was like, is this depression or is this anxiety and I'm trying to find a title or a label so that I can understand it better because my logical brain is like, I have never dealt with this feeling before. What is this? And how do I immediately, it's like, how do I fix it? How do I band-aid it? How
Mhm.
do I find a solution so that I don't feel this way? When really the only way through that is like, you actually just have to sit in that feeling. Like there is absolutely no way around that. And I did my best to fight and crawl and climb the walls out. And I just had to sit in it. Like, and what ended up happening was I remember, like, I think I actually told my parents this, that like, if I don't, at some point, I was like, if I don't drop out, like, you're either going to have a daughter that drops out or is dead. Like, that's the two options here. Cause I was like, I am so unhappy. Like, none of this feels like me. Like, so I remember when I was at school, like I had asked for like, to take a gap year, like, and my scholarship luckily allowed me to do that. Like it said, written in there that you could take a gap year and your financial means could pick up the next year and you wouldn't be, you wouldn't lose your scholarship. And so I took at least a gap year. Like I remember, but after that, I knew the rates, went down after you took a gap year. I knew that the risk I was taking was like, I might never come back. There's a lot of people that take a break and they are way less likely to come back to school. And so I took a gap year and I stayed at home with my parents and I tried, to get a job. And I was just like so unable to keep a job. Like I was like, I'm so like, something is so wrong. Like I can't sleep, I can't eat. Like, I can't hold a job. Like, and luckily, they're at that point in their career, they're doing very well. They're financially well off. Like I'm the first child, I'm the only daughter, and I'm the first one to go to college. Right. So like my parents like worked really hard to like put all that aside for me to be able to at least half afford me going to school. And at that time, I don't see that as a privilege. I'm 18. I'm like, let me do what I want with my life. Like, I don't care about this. I don't want to have to do this just because this is what you saw for me or you wanted for me. And that like struggle of like them wanting me to be safe and secure and stable and wanting and thinking that's the best for me, of course, as my parents. And then the reality of me being like, I'm going to have to figure this out on my own. And I'm too young right now to know what that is, but I know it's not this right now. It might be in 5 or 10 years down the line. But if I stay in this, I'm not going to make it. So, like, what's more important, So, and my parents really struggled with that because none of my brothers and me were not, struggling in the same way. So,
Mhm.
or at least talking about that. My youngest brother, yes, but no one was really out there talking about it. And I was the first one to go to school because I was the oldest. So I took that gap year. And what was really interesting is that I ended up just stumbling upon like an energy healing, like mystery arts school. And I remember being like, well, at the very least, I'm going to go to this because I need help. Like, and I had a guidance counselor at University of Vermont, which was the college that I was attending. And she was kind of like, she wasn't willing to diagnose it or label it. And for me at that time was making me go crazy. I was like, I absolutely need that. And she was like, well, if you are depressed, like running rigorously on the treadmill or doing something to create that serotonin, and all of those things are true. But I'm just like, well, I don't even know how to move forward if I don't have an answer of what it is, and like spiraling with that, and making,
Mhm.
going down so many different lanes of the unknown, like, because I didn't have a professional diagnosis, At this point, I can look back and see, like, absolutely that was what was going on. I don't need somebody outside of me to validate that. But at that time, I'm too young, like, and I'm in nursing school. We're learning all about that stuff. So it's like the self diagnosis is real. Like the hypochondriacness is real, when you go through and you learn all that stuff. And it's just funny because it's like I look back and I was like, nobody from the outside would have ever been able to tell because my grades were astounding. I was on the dean's list. I had like a 3.8 GPA. I was so high achieving and I hated everything that I was doing. Like nobody would have ever known, like, because I was doing so quote unquote well in school because it was, test based, it was grade based. And I was very smart. Like I cared about doing well, but it was like I just didn't have that drive or that passion. And the reason why that started happening around that time is because around the second year, you actually start taking more nursing courses. The first year you take prereqs, and that was actually fun. That was great. I did things like psychology, human development, abnormal psychology, nutrition, and English and geography. And I enjoyed a lot of those. But the second year, you actually start reading like the nursing textbooks. And then third and fourth year is clinical when you actually start clocking those hours. And I was just like starting to realize like the way this is set up is just not who I am. And I had so many questions, just like I did when I was younger in CCD, that I would get in trouble for asking because there was no answer for it. Like that's what it reminded me of, was like, no, this is just it. And you're not going to ask questions because nobody has the answer for it. Like, and wouldn't admit to that. But, and when I was in nursing school reading those texts, I was like, yeah, but like, why are we not looking at like the root problem? Like, why are we just treating the symptoms? Like, and I'm like, 18, 19, 20 at this time when I'm realizing this. And I'm like, I don't understand. Like, nobody's going to get better if we're just treating the symptoms that are coming up, and which is very reactive way to respond, not proactive. There's not much in here about lifestyle changes. There's not much in here about the root cause and what could be causing this. And let's help heal that first. But most of it is about getting on medication. And most of it is about, just not even healing those symptoms, but creating something that allows them to subside enough to ignore or to live with, so that you're not in absolute chronic pain, or you're not, debilitated, but you're still just numbing that enough to get through. And as much as people need medication and how important that is, and we are so privileged to live in a time where modern technology and modern medicine exists where it hadn't in past, previous centuries, there's also a limit to that, I think, of how much we're allowing that to have power over us, and not always necessarily be complementary. Like it is meant to complement that process and help us heal and help us feel better and improve. But if that's the sole thing that we're doing and we're not looking at underneath, then the problem will always exist in a different form. It might manifest differently, mentally, physically. But if we're not getting to the root of maybe what's causing that, then we're never going to truly transform. And I think I realized like, I would rather go all the way deep with people than treat the surface level and just let them live their life and pay all this money for medication and never truly feel better, but just enough to get by and not fully be fulfilled or fully be happy or fully feel, great or healthy. And I think for me, that was where the dissonance was. And I couldn't understand why it was being taught that way or why we couldn't go deeper with it. And a lot of these textbooks, although updated, they try to update every few years. A lot of this stuff was based, I want to say in the 80s or 90s too. So to me, a lot of it had been outdated too. And I just realized like I would love to heal and I would love to serve people and I absolutely want to be of service, but this isn't the way. And there was also like a long lineage there. My mom is a nurse. Her mom eventually was a nurse, not working for first half of life and second half picking up nursing as well. So it wasn't necessarily chronological, but there was that influence there, definitely lineage wise for the women in my family on my mom's side. And I believe there's a few other nurses too, long down the line. So it was kind of like a big thing and a big shift for me to say, I actually don't want to do this and this isn't for me. I was literally brought up, we were assuming that was what I was going to be. hence going to college, hence only applying to colleges that had a nursing program, only applying through the nursing program, then to go to a 4-year college to become a nurse just to drop out 2 years in, you know? So all that to say, it's like, I started realizing around that time, there was something so deeply upsetting and unfulfilled within me that wasn't having a voice. And at that time, you know, autonomy is so important. Like, you're just figuring out who you are. Like, and parents are doing their best to keep you safe and secure, and they want you to be, you know, financially sound and have the means and having the resources and not be stressed about that and live like a really good life. But at the end of it, it was kind of like my parents were like, you're right. Like, we just want you to be happy. And if you're not that, then what's the point of all of this, you know? So yeah, sorry, I'm getting so emotional.
Oh,
I don't know
please
if
do not.
anybody else has gotten emotional on this.
Please do not apologize. I feel like we're seeing you. You said, you know, realizing your own sensitivity is such a huge part of the creative aspect that I hear you saying allowed you to shift, right? Because my story mirrors yours in a different way, right? You came to a path that was, you know, even you said very masculine, dutiful. You were being the dutiful daughter, and you were being, you know, I hear you say CCD, so I'm assuming that you were Catholic. I haven't heard
Yeah.
I'm sorry, say that again.
Being brought up that way. Yeah.
Yes, I would phrase it the exact same way about myself. And so to deviate away from that, you know, in that frame of, I would say, religious experience, speaking on my own behalf, it feels really, no, 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 you're not allowed to deviate away from, you know, I wouldn't even say what your parents are prescribing you to do, but as you put it, like the way that your parents are trying to frame your life so you don't have to struggle, right? Because it's what they know, right? It's same as you're pointing out those books were outdated. Like, they're coming, love them, but they're coming from an outdated perspective too, right? They're coming from a different time period of life when they grew up and they were developed, and you're developing now. So your developing is different than theirs, right? And so it makes so much sense to me. My brain was like giggling because I'm like, wow, she was going to pursue this path of being a nurturer to the collective, to the contribution that you are doing now, just in a different way. And in my frame of reference, I was a project manager. I help manage projects. Now I'm a coach. I help people manage their lives. So there's always this crossover, which again, we were talking about before this, but also, you know, I really appreciate you sharing your sensitivity about your dark night of the soul journey, about your depression, about your experience of feeling really lost, because I relate to that. And I got emotional when you got emotional because I feel like our culture is fixated on positivity, and it becomes toxic when we stop talking about the hardships that humans face, which is why Dirty Pretty exists, right? The beauty wouldn't be as pristine without the hardship, right? We wouldn't covet it as much as we do if the depth wasn't so deep. And so I feel like you giving a name and a voice and a sentiment, a sentience to this experience is such a missed opportunity in our culture, because we're all, in my experience, struggling from some sort of trauma. It's same shit, different outfit, right? Your trauma is different than my traumas, than their trauma, than their trauma. Some of it overlaps, some of it doesn't. And so what I hear you saying, which is so I love about you, it's just so rock and roll about you with your beautiful Stevie Nicks self, I love it, is that your creativity came out when you decided to defy what was you felt preordained for you. And even in like the thing that you mentioned before, like taking the opportunity to cook. That's something I love too. And every time I was cooking in before my dark night of the soul journey, it was obligatory. It was for an end. I had to eat, my husband had to eat, you know, had to eat healthy because that's what my body preferred. Now when I cook, I'm like, what sort of love am I infusing into these sauteed onions? You know, like really trying to be appreciative for the experience and appreciative for like the science of the experience, the chemistry of cooking. It's so creative, right? And so to that creativity, a part of deviating away from a path is absolutely creative. It's absolutely daredevilish as well. You're rebellious, you're a maverick, you're a visionary. What boundaries did you need to start to necessitate in order to allow you to, and I'm going to explain it a certain way, to look at this is who I was before, and this is who I guess I'm navigating to now, because it's all a question mark, right? You're like, I know, all I know is I'm going away from this. And the journey forward is like black. You don't know what's going to be there. You may have a sort of idea sometimes, but then you have to shift your boundaries, because now your boundaries are in service of what you want. And when we're lost, most of the time we're going, I don't even know what the fuck I want because I actually never thought about it before. So,
Mhm.
what boundaries did you notice that you needed to start necessitating for yourself to really give yourself the permission to be defiant?
Oh yeah, it was it was definitely rocky at first. And it was hard because I was living at home with my parents. So even though I'm of legal age of being an adult, I'm also back under their roof during this time because I'm leaving school and I'm taking a gap year. And so that was really hard and interesting to navigate. And my parents' first time doing it too, with me being, the first oldest child, So and my younger brothers are still at home because they're just not of age yet to leave and they're still in high school, so that was very interesting. It definitely, I felt like that time between teenagehood and young adulthood was very much like rageful for sure, because my voice was coming online and it was like, here's all the ways that I don't agree with how things were getting run, like even if you guys were doing the best you could. And so it was definitely not graceful. Like it was, I'm learning how to express myself and move through this in a way that I know how best at that time. My brain's not even fully developed yet. I am super young. I'm feeling so feisty for like, being boxed in that way. And there's also this I don't know, there's also this, I don't know if it would be shame or guilt or resentment even towards myself, because I had never really checked in or considered what I wanted. I just went with this and assumed just like everybody else. But I was so, when you grow up like that, children and adults, it's like children and their parents, they are enmeshed to some degree. Like their energy systems are enmeshed. Like they're literally dependent on their parents to feed them, on their parents to house them. So a lot of that starts getting shut down early because you can't choose to be authentic because you need to have these needs met. And if you're actually yourself, what if you're abandoned by your parents? How are you going to get your resources and your needs met? So that's very like survival mode of, and then you start coming into this like your own, where you're at that age where you can start, experimenting with that and or have no choice. It just starts coming online. That's why teenagers are so good with boundaries. Like they literally, that throat chakra starts to come online and they're like, nope, nope, nope. And I don't care who, and the hormones are raging and they do not care. And they're in high school where everyone's judging each other. Like, so it's like that. Like, and I had a bit of that too, still like owning my inner teenager and like what she was struggling with and how painful that was. And what were the ways that like that was shut down for me as a woman, as, a young girl, that it's different, it's shut down differently for young boys. So like I couldn't be angry, which made me angrier. It was like I couldn't be all those things because I'm a woman. And it's like, so then it would just bubble up and I would be rageful, I'd be yelling, I'd be having, temper tantrums. Like it was definitely not graceful. Like it was like, I would fight with my parents. It was hard. Like I would speak up where they felt like I shouldn't speak up, and I would say the thing that anybody else in the room maybe wasn't going to say, So I had a really hard time with that for quite a bit, especially around that time. And I would say I was just starting to navigate boundaries. Like I didn't really know that term at that time yet. It wasn't such a buzzword as it is now. And it wasn't really seen just yet as such a stepping stone in the healing journey until what I see is like in the last recent few years. So it was like, yeah. And that was like a hard place to be because I still need to listen to them to some extent. It's their house. I need to respect those rules and they're still paying for things for me. And yet also I'm over 18 and I'm technically a legal adult. And how do I balance being myself while still living under that roof? And you just get kind of re-triggered into those childhood dynamics and patterns because you're in that space again. So it's like you do start acting younger than you are and you do start getting triggered and feeling more immature and like unable to like, emotionally regulate or calm yourself down or take the higher road or be more mature. Like you do start doing that. But I was definitely like very rebellious. Like I was, experimenting in ways that like my parents didn't even know, like, so there was a lot going on behind the scenes that like, at least I don't think my parents know. I never directly told them. It seems like they didn't know because I didn't directly say. But definitely around that time, especially because I was so lost and confused. It was like, how do I cope with this? And like,
Mhm.
I don't have anyone to talk to. And at the time, it was like I had a therapist, but now I look back and it's like, it's so important to have the right one for you, like, because they are all so different and their background and their specialties are so different that I just got in wherever I could get in. And I look back now and I'm like, oh, that's actually not who I needed at the time. And who I've had now for 5 years is absolutely perfect for where I'm at. And like, who knows if she would have been perfect at that time too for me, because that was such a different version of myself. But I do look back and I was like, oh, this is why things really weren't like moving. Like they weren't really flowing. Like there wasn't a lot of resonance. It was just like I got in where I needed to get in because they were so filled. Like schedule wise that I was like, I needed somebody, but, and now it's like, I understand the specificities a little better and like where I can kind of, find that right niche in a therapist for me to be like accepting of who I am or like confirming and validating. I don't need that. But at that time being so young, that was a need, cause I was so confused. I didn't know myself. It would have been helpful to have somebody mirror like who I was and like really keep me grounded and centered in that. So like I said, you just literally you go through it. You're in this like dark night of the soul, as I would call it. I end up coming upon this is the thing though, like about the dark night of the soul. It's like if we had no darkness, we wouldn't have any mystery. We wouldn't have any mystical experiences. We wouldn't have that necessary need to connect with something bigger than us. And that's really the true gift in that for me is like when I really started to like create my own beliefs for myself and like what does God look like to me, and is it God, is it goddess, is it oneness, is it divinity, is it what is that label, is it universe? Like to me that's all the same thing. It just depends on what resonates with who. And that's where I really started to have that come online, mainly through this mystery arts school that taught like energy healing. And I'll credit it in here. It's right now it's called Trinity Temple of Sacred Wisdom, so I will definitely credit that. I'm still working with this school now, many years later, more as like a TA, and just kind of like owning our own elements. Mine's fire, if you can't tell. Mine's like so fire, right? So like when you have that and people don't have that, or it's like dimmed or it's not lit up and there's stagnation in there, like those are the perfect people you need to be around to just reignite that and light that up and remind you who you are and like reflect that to you and just hold that torch for the people that are in that place where you used to be and you might very well be in again tomorrow. Like it happened. It's cyclical, it's not this one-time thing. It's like that's what life is like, and that's not going to go away, right? So it's like, how do we develop tools that might better help us when that comes around again? Because like me and my therapist always talk about how like, again, this like idea of linear, and it's like the healing path and life in general is anything but that. It's this spiral, it's this cycle, this cyclical process and path where you come around to the same thing in a little bit of a different, energy signature, similar enough that it reminds you of the past, but how are you going to deal with it differently now? And how are you showing up now that you have different tools, or now that you have awareness or insight and this knowledge and wisdom that you can use from the past? But there's nothing like getting knocked on your ass the first time. Like everyone's going to have to go through that. It's almost unavoidable. Like, and it is for me so ungraceful, right? Like it's like, and at the age I was too, it was just like, wow, this is already hitting, like, so going through this school helped me own how creative I was. Like, and I was in that energetic profile. We call it the creative idealist. And there's supposedly about 5 energetic profiles. And the creative idealist, it's like, that's great. But there's to each profile with anything, there's a light and a shadow side, right? So I'm fully in the dark. I'm fully in the shadow because I've never owned this profile. I've never worked with it before. I don't know how it shows up. I don't know how to work with it. And I've been shoved into other profiles my whole life. So when I'm in this one, how do I operate from that? And how do I transmute a lot of this darkness here and this shadow into the light version and aspects of like what this profile is? Like, how do I show up in that? And so now having this background and this knowledge, having gone through that school, and it completely rocked my world. Like it challenged me in so many ways I've never seen before. My intellect, my logical brain couldn't make sense of it. And it was like, how are these things happening? And there's no known answer for it. There's no solution. There's no logic behind it. And that's when I really started to like actually be able to access my intuition and practice that and use it with my logic rather than only running one side of my brain all the time, like, or my body or my energetic system. Like, rather than denying that, how do they work together? Like, how do they complement each other? How can we use both the feeling and the mind to like move through life better and more graceful? And so allowing that profile to come up and realizing, wow, I'm really creative and I can get really ungrounded and I'm super psychic and I really can have my channel blown open and all of these things. It's like, okay, well, now how do we like move forward in life knowing that better? Because I didn't know what was going on before and now I do. And so having that knowledge is so empowering because now I know how to like work with it a little better, you know, and now I know what's going on a little better underneath the surface. Like, why was I getting mentally ill? What was going on there? Like, because there's a lot of reasons for that. And for me, it's like, if there's a path that's not your path and you're on it, of course you're going to feel that way. Like, genetic or not genetic, you're going to eventually hit that wall and realize none of this is me. None of this is fulfilling and it's not doing anything for me, right? Like this is what other people want. And this is what my mind believes will get me to that achievement or be, you know, people proud of me, will get me validated, will get me, you know, this worthiness that I might not have yet. But then it's like I get there and then what does it matter if I don't like the life that I look around and see? Like it doesn't anymore. Like, so start breaking those things down and figuring out what you actually desire in your life and where you want to go with it. And that takes time, right? Like that's not an overnight process. That's why like healing is talked about for your entire life. It gets easier and it gets, you know, less and less extreme, I would say. Like there's a lot more balance and nuance there. Neutrality becomes in like, but you still have those things you need to work through maybe for your entire life, right? So rather than demonizing those or looking at it through a lens of perfectionism and feeling like you're flawed, it's just like figuring out ways that those complement other parts of yourself. And what are the light attributes of that? And how can you bring more of that in rather than feeling shame about it? So that really opened up my creativity. And then I realized, oh, creativity is what's connected to prosperity and abundance. Like you actually make more money most of the time when you're creative than when you're not, because there's limitless potential and possibilities there. The opportunities flow and the floodgates open, like, and you start having these ideas of like how you can make money while still in your purpose and still aligned, rather than working this one job for 25, 30, 40 years, getting inevitably burnt out, bored, stuck, stagnant, having midlife crisis on top of it, just to have that retirement fund at the end, right? Like, so now you're living for a day that doesn't even exist yet, and you might never roll around into it in the way that you plan. So what does your life look like right now versus how do you want it to look like right now? Like, and what do you want it to feel like? Even more importantly, what does it feel like? And starting to get curious about that. And Dark Night of Soul kind of makes you do that. Like you don't really have a choice. You're forced into that. So either way, everyone ends up going through it. They just are, you know, more or less conscious or more or less aware of what's going on as they move through that. And you can choose to numb it and avoid it, but it just cycles back, right? Like the soul will always have, you know, wants and needs and desires that have that nagging feeling when they're not being fulfilled or tapped into. And you know that deep in when you're not fully aligned or when you're not accessing your full potential. And how do we sleep at night when we know that? Like when we're not on purpose, when we're out of alignment, when, you know, we have this nagging, like I can't sleep well at night. Like, and I've lived my life many years at this point now, realizing like I actually sleep better when I know I'm actually moving towards that, or I'm shifting things around to be more in alignment because I don't have this knowing that I'm not doing the thing I'm supposed to be doing. So yeah, it's a lot of things, but
yeah. So the boundaries that it sounds like you were instituting was surrender.
Mhm.
And that's really hard when you feel like you're being, going through the chrysalis period and you're being liquefied in your brain and everything is just melting together. And you're like, I don't know what the fuck is happening to me. And you
Mhm.
feel wild. You feel out of control. Like I always compare it to be like a loose power line. You're just like, oh, I'm everywhere. Because when you're sensitive, as you were describing before, and you're seeking validation, something I say to my clients all the time is like, when you're seeking validation, it's because you're not validating yourself.
Mhm.
So when we allow ourselves to surrender to that, that's the boundary. And anything that comes into the circumference of our energy field is like, no, see, I'm in surrender to me, not to you
Mhm.
anymore. Right. And so I hear you saying that a part of that creativity came in was like, oh, mom and dad were trying to make sense of what you were going through. And you're like, I don't even know what the fuck I'm going through. Right. And it's coming out with that rage because it's been suppressed and repressed for so long. And so it's almost like the fire hose. There's no real clean way for it to come out. It's spitting paraphernalia everywhere because it's been locked in so long that, like you said, there really is no clean way to do it. It's the mess is coming whether you like it or not. But the
Mhm.
mess is coming to give you the message that there is no nothing else you can do here but surrender.
Mhm.
And it's very hard when you feel like you're out of control, particularly for people like us. And I'm saying us because you're describing what I think you're describing is we were very diligent task workers. Having achievement and credentialing to support our achievements was important to us because then it was also something that we could say to our parents, look, you did such a good job. See, like I got my degree and now I'm this thing, right? It makes sense. It's wrapped up in this beautiful bow. But when you realize that you are a very dynamic person, it becomes hard to face yourself because you've been so contrast to that your entire life. And I really appreciate that you pointed out the therapy thing. And this is something that I say to everyone that will listen about any doctor, any practitioner, anyone that you go to seek advice, guidance from, is that this is not a one and done scenario. You walk into that therapy appointment and the energy is off, or the fucking room you don't even like. Try
Mhm.
something else. You're not beholden to them. You're not beholden to anyone. Even if you're in therapy for 5 years and you really like that person, I have had the blessing of being in therapy containers where my therapist has said to me, Shannon, you're going to need someone that's going to be able to take you deeper than cognitive behavioral therapy. You need to go deep. And so here's some recommendations, right? Like I was blessed to have that introduction by a practitioner giving me the permission to choose me, to
Mhm.
surrender to what felt good to me, and to go
Mhm.
out and to be creative and like try different things, working with doulas, energy healers, Reiki, all sorts of different things. And so I
Mhm.
appreciate you pointing that out because I think that when we get lost, the first thing we want to do is cling. We want to
Mhm.
find something to cling to because we're like, I'm so unanchored. I know what anchored is, and that's what feels calming for me. And we don't bother to stop and think, well, is the idea of not being anchored actually what I need right now? Right. And so I really appreciate you just giving this very thorough explanation, which is why I love you, about the boundary sometimes looks like just doing whatever you fucking want to do. And what comes with that, though, when you start deviating away and being defiant and being a visionary, is that your whole life, sometimes we can get the message, like you said. And I love my mom, but I was a very vocal child as well, saying the things in the room, right? And my mom would call me Mouth. She was like, listen, Mouth from the South, because I grew up in the South Hills of Pennsylvania. Because I was just always, like, hey, there's an injustice here for me, right?
Mhm.
And we get to that place where, we need to be transparent and it's not against them. I'm not being honest with you to fuck your day up. I'm
Mhm.
not being honest with you and telling you what I feel to be combative. I'm just trying to be myself. Everything that I do that exemplifies me is not against anyone else. And that is
Mhm.
hard to learn in our rigid culture. And that is a boundary in and of itself. To hold in your heart the intention of why you do things is not so that you can piss someone else off, even if they perceive it to be that way. You have
Mhm.
to hold true to your intention. And I hear that so often in our culture. People are like, intention doesn't matter. What matters is how I felt. No, because I'm in the conversation too. So yeah, intention does matter. How you received it matters, but also what I intended does matter.
Mhm.
And so growing up in this dynamic and coming through this dark night of the soul journey and picking up all these boundaries that you didn't have before, looking at yourself differently, not knowing what the end result looks like, as you pointed out beautifully, because we're continually evolving. It's never going to be, oh, I figured me out. You're going to be figuring yourself out when, you're on your deathbed and, you hear people having these realizations of like, I really shouldn't have worried about that. That's
Right.
evolving. That's a realization. That's a boundary that you're realizing for yourself.
Right.
So coming through this experience with yourself, getting to the point of realizing, oh, I'm psychic. Oh, I'm intuitive. And I say this because of my experience, not any judgment whatsoever. Coming from a religious background, such as Catholicism, metaphysics is often, that's not allowed. That's not a conversation you're going to be having. At least it was where I went to CCD and went to church, right? So when you came across that information, like, whoa, I might have some magic that is unproven by science that I hold all by myself. I can't validate to anyone with data, facts, or logistics. I just know. What was that? How did you allow yourself to accept I have a certain sentience about things and really just allowing that for you?
I think it was at the beginning. I mean, oh, geez, I had a lot of resistance because I hadn't been brought up where that was nurtured at all.
Mhm.
And I also was in kind of more of a family dynamic where what it felt like was people were too disconnected to actually like touch in with that.
Yeah.
So because of that, it was just like, I kind of almost knew that existed out there somewhere. And then I just never had it come all the way fully in. I had
Mhm.
never, looked into it before. I knew, psychics were a thing and like card readers and stuff. And I had actually gone to like a reader. It's interesting that like when we're in our like darkest times, that's where we turn. But like when we're regulated, when we're settled in, when we feel anchored and like day to day is going smoothly and structuredly, we don't always think to like connect with that. But like when we're at our darkest times, we're like, wow, we actually really need clarity and guidance. And like,
You're like, I'll take anything. Give me any
yeah,
fucking answer.
like anyone, please, figure this out for me because I don't know what's going on myself. I don't have access to my own clarity. I don't have access to my own guidance. And I'm feeling, unanchored in my own life and I don't have answers or solutions to anything yet. So I would say like that really I had to work on that. Like and
Yeah.
it comes naturally, but because I had so much like masculine like rigidity and doing things from the mind rather than the body or anywhere else, like I really had to like start practicing that and like intentionally tuning into my body and being like, how does this feel? How does this feel? How does this feel? Like, and like
Mhm.
doing cards or like any sort of like divination tool, although you don't need to, but that's sometimes a great place to start because it kind of reflects to you what you already knew and it confirms it. So there's this like positive feedback loop that starts to happen. So you build that confidence and that trust muscle in yourself rather than having to source everything externally from science, from research, from data, from what other people tell you. So we have an earthquake right now.
Get out of town.
Yeah, I can feel it. It's over, but I'm in Los Angeles, Southern California, so I'm not totally surprised.
Oh my gosh. The universe is like, give this to the world. Tell them your truth, and it's shaking things
Pick
up.
it up, yeah.
Mm.
But yeah, I guess like all that to say, it's like that really, like I said before, really started to open up my eyes and rock my world. Like it really started to, I guess, go against what I had been brought up believing and thinking
Mhm.
very conventionally and very linearly.
Mhm.
So because of that, like I really had to like start implementing it into my day to day. And
Mhm.
the thing is, when I came in, I was really, really disconnected from my body, from my guides, from any sort of knowing or feeling. Like I was coming in really numb, like really lost, really confused, really dissociated, really disconnected from body, really ungrounded. And that's the thing about that profile is that like in the really extremes of it, in the shadow, it can be that way. And oftentimes when we haven't worked through our shit, everything is shadow because we just come in with that, like it's like we live from a place of shadow until we start working on and transmuting it and starting to see the lighter aspects and the joy and the gifts and all of that. It's really
Mhm.
hard to see that when you're just in the shadow version of it or in the darkness of it. So yeah, I had to work with a lot of other people who were psychic and intuitive and owning that for me to feel comfortable owning that, like finding that community where that's already normal is huge, because you're already going up against a lot of societal programming that is shutting that down, and that's enforcing it to be shut down over and over and over again. And
Hmm.
like, as kids, we're already intuitive, but like if that's not nurtured or believed, or it's shunned or shamed, it immediately gets shut down.
Yeah.
Because if we were actually to like hold on to what we knew, like it was not anything that maybe reality was showing us, and how disconnected that can feel and really fragmenting. I think it's actually sometimes in survival mode that has to get shut down to start moving through life in a way with our parents, so that our needs can get met. And then a lot of times with the journey, it's like about coming back around to that. It's like, what was that like when you were a kid before that got shut down? What
Hmm.
gifts did you have come online that were like immediately like turned away by grown-ups who already had their gifts shut off or shut down? So they didn't believe you, or they didn't see it, or they didn't feel it, or they didn't know it. And so not having that nurtured for so long, plus like growing into like a very like, achievement based, coming from mind person, that actually challenged a lot for me, which was great because it opened up my mind to so much more, so many more potentials and possibilities that I was missing by moving through life without that, and
Hmm.
always externalizing my power to like outside information or outside people, rather than ever learning to check in with myself. Like, and again, because I felt like I was around people who were very disconnected, that would never be nurtured. It makes sense that that would never be on the table for like, so when I look back, it's like I actually had to go through that to even come into the place that I'm at now, which is like deep, deep gratitude for that. And like remembering that that's such a gift to check in with and not taking it for granted, because there's a lot of people still walking around like really disconnected from that, and
Yeah.
like in a lot of pain, or even not feeling anything at all, which includes not feeling the pain, but they're not feeling great either. They're not feeling anything,
Hmm.
so I would say being around the right people, finding the people that are going to nurture that rather than like really shut that down for you. Finding those people and having boundaries with who you tell about it too can be super helpful. If you know someone's not really into that, or they're a little like judgmental or a little fearful of that because that's not their beliefs or their upbringing, then just being, okay, not always sharing as well, or sharing with the right people that are going to really embrace that part about you.
Hmm.
And yeah, and things like cards or pendulums or different divination tools can really help. But just remembering, going about your day, checking in too, like remembering the body exists as a tool, like that there's so much hidden wisdom in there, but you have to be quiet enough to really hear it and silent enough to really listen, because that's always there. It's trying to be communicated. Like when we have things like mental health stuff come up or physical ailments, oftentimes it's a manifestation of that not being addressed, and that can be different for everyone, but it seems like it comes from that same sort of source of having like a lot of trauma that hasn't been dealt with or seen or allowed to come out of that box, and it's just
Hmm.
being shoved down. Those emotions still live in the body somewhere. The energy is trapped in there. The trauma is stored in there, and if it doesn't have a place to come out to see the light of day, then we do feel off. We don't feel ourselves. We know we're not living at our optimal. We know we're not living our best. We're not feeling our best. And
Hmm.
so, but people are afraid to address that. Of course, there's a lot of scary things in there, but there's also a lot of gifts in the body that eventually come out too, including your intuition, including your insights, including your wisdom, including those different, clair senses. And, they call that the golden shadow too, is like
Yes.
part of like doing shadow work that's actually makes that so magical at the end, is like really being grateful, because had you not gone through or dealt with or addressed XYZ, you never would have got to see these amazing parts as well.
Yeah, it's like if you're turned down, then your gifts are turned down, right? And that's if any way, you're shielding yourself, you're quieting yourself, you're muting yourself, you're invalidating yourself, all the things that we've been saying, then you're not going to be able to hear or be as connected to your gifts. Because as you're saying, the shadow, I've read different books, Young, different psychics, whatnot, of the comparison that they often make is like envision a circle, envision a crust outside the circle. The shadow is actually only 10% of who you are. It is the protective layer. And once you get through this layer, beneath that is your essence. It's your effervescence. It's your golden shadow. And you've protected it because perhaps maybe, like you said, it wasn't talked about. It wasn't normalized. It wasn't even mentioned as being acceptable, a gift. It was always scary, put into the scary box, right? Because nobody can quantify it, nobody can explain it. And sometimes what we can't explain is science. Our culture likes to say, well, that's dangerous, it's not valid, right? And I hear you just giving people a lot of permission. And I would love to have you back on to talk about your, you said your Claire channels, like, oh my gosh, the golden shadow, the intuitive nature, like turning that on. Because, like you said, as a child, I had experiences all the time. And then I had some traumas and it went quiet. And then at another point in my life, it came back on when I found my husband. And then I went through infertility and it went quiet. And then I went through dark night of the soul. And then it was like my pieces were blown all over the place. And that thing was at the center. It was like you said early on, you're going to have a daughter that is, maybe dead or drops out of school, right? And that's the message that I got from my intuition was, I'm already dying here. So if I go through this dark night of the soul journey and I die, it's the same everywhere because it was not worth it for me to continue staying where I was, but that was all intuition. In fact, before we got on this conversation, I was having a conversation with my girlfriend about my dirty, pretty graphics. And I kept saying to her for the last few months, like, they're not final, but I wanted this to go out. It was more important that it be out. And she's sending me, because she was on the podcast issued today, she's sending me all these messages she's getting about these graphics. Oh my God, they're so beautiful, blah, blah, blah. And she's like, how did you come up with this? And it was all intuition. Like it came to me in a vision and revealed itself to me. And so the fact that we're having this conversation and you're saying this to me is not an accident. Right. And I do agree. There are different ways that you can become a student of your gifts. And they come, little things I have sometimes where I can tell my husband's going to be coming home, boom, right through the door. Right. I'll have little hits like he's going to need the oven on at 375, put it on, boom, exactly what he needed. Right. And so before I would deviate away from that, like I'll just wait and then just, mute it and put it down. But now that I've been playing with it, being more creative with it, instituting boundaries with permission with it, there are those moments where I get goosebumps of myself. And I'm like, that is fucking creepy. Like,
how did I know that? Even I'm like, yeah, absolutely.
Totally.
Absolutely.
So I appreciate you giving all this permission to everyone today. And I wanted to ask you, to me, you're giving nothing but the things that you love about what you do. And you're giving people the opportunity to be themselves, be authentic, don't be afraid, be cautious about who you're sharing your gifts with. It may not be that they can't hold them. It may be that they don't understand them, right? And don't let that misunderstanding or that lack of connection deter you from your exploration. So for those that are watching this and thinking, okay, I want to maybe traipse into this land and I'm not really sure what to expect. What do you think people considering doing what you do, something like what you do, any piece or part of this, what do you think they should know about taking on this profession?
Oh, I love this question so much. And it ties a lot into like my spiritual self and my creative self is so, feels like the same. And I'm sure that's true for many people. It's like having that, divine spark, that like creative inspiration and following that impulse, it's like very spontaneous and moment to moment. But what comes with that, because often our spirituality and our creativity is so intertwined, is all the beliefs that come with being creative and why you can't do it and why it's deemed irresponsible and why you don't have time to do it and why you don't have energy to do it and why you aren't prioritizing it and how it can't sustain you and it won't make money and all your passions and your interests and your creativity aren't, responsible or linear enough to hold the lifestyle you want monetarily, time wise. There's so much programming around why you can't do that, like, and why you have to stay so rigid and so conventional in this society to make it. And that's
Yeah.
often coming from, survival. It's coming from, understandably, families that couldn't support their kids as well as they wanted to in times of need. And those kids growing up being like, the one thing I value, or the two things I value, is safety and security and stability. And that includes knowing where and when my finances are coming in. But how much is that also shadow? Because it's survival and it's not really who you are or necessarily what you want. It's coming from what you absolutely need. And all of
Mhm.
those things are very true. You need that baseline to survive. You need that baseline to feel safe. Have you not have that, there is no space to be creative, right? Because ideally you need that time and that space to flow. And if the foundation isn't there financially, then there's no space for that. You're not even focused on that. You're trying to get your basic needs met, right? And
Right.
everyone goes through that time to time and throughout life, where they're like, do I choose this or do I choose this? And how do I intertwine those to have both, the best of both worlds, to create the life that I truly dream of and want and desire, that's leading me there through my desire? And I would say, like, start with those beliefs, like, and it's okay to do the practical thing and not jump into it and leap into it. It's okay to, like, try to plan, it's okay to try to set yourself up for success. And it's
Mhm.
also okay to take that leap of faith when you feel that so strongly that you're going to be caught, right? Like, both of those are okay. Like, because our relationship to money exists in many chakras, there's different ways of relating to it. And there's
Mhm.
different ways that that shows up and stops us and disempowers us. And there's other ways that we let it flow and it empowers us. So
Yeah.
using both, intellect and intuition is okay. Setting yourself
Mhm.
up financially, setting yourself up practically is okay. Also, taking that leap of faith, just doing the fucking thing, going full force, doing that is also okay. Trusting that you're going to be caught is also okay, because that guidance is coming from somewhere, and that is worth trusting in. Even if the practicalities aren't in order, even if the structure is not laid, just getting things out there, the message out there is sometimes so strong. It's okay to follow that impulse. So I would say, starting with those beliefs that put creativity off to the side, that put spirituality off to the side, right? And
Mhm.
they don't center a life where those are the foundation. They don't center it at all, really. They don't pay a lot of attention to it. And a lot of us as kids might have not had the time to be creative either. A lot of
Mhm.
us grew up really early, like way quicker than we ever could have wanted or imagined. And so that starts dwindling really early too. And so
Mhm.
sometimes, like, the inner parent in us tells our inner child that we don't have time to create, or that we're too exhausted to play, or we don't have the energy, right? Like,
Mhm.
oftentimes what we heard from our parents when they couldn't give us the time and the attention we actually needed as kids. And so having that conversation, bringing everybody to the table, all the parts, right? And really listening to inner child and being like, what do you need and what do you desire? Like, and how do I make more time for that?
Mhm.
And those beliefs will come that you need to be responsible. You need to stay in your 9 to 5. You can't make money being creative. You can't make money being unconventional and, trailblazing or creating your own path. Those will come, but, like, dealing with those as they come and dealing with the resistance you have to being on a very unconventional or unlinear path, because maybe that's truly who you are and what you want. I always say, like, if the thing that's stopping you is fear, that's easy. Just like, deal with the fear. It's not that you don't want that thing. It's much harder if you don't have the resources legitimately, or you truly have blocks in the way, right? Like, but if fear is the block, okay, we can work through that. Like, you just need to start developing courage, like, and having those people in our corner, therapists, practitioners, healers, whoever we're working with, coaches, help us get there, help us reflect back to us who we are without all our fears so loud and so noisy, all our worries, our self-doubt, our negativity, all that conditioning that's not truly ours, but we got brought up with. It's like, okay, start dealing with those, start quieting those, at least neutralizing it. So we just start to create some movement towards it. Because those will come up on a path like this, of
Mhm.
being an energy medicine practitioner, of
Yeah.
being a healer, of being a writer, of being an artist, of being a creative. All of those things will come up, and people from the outside will tell you as well that you can't do it, because they're too fearful to do it themselves, or they chose a different path out of fear as well. So then they have these beliefs that are so strong, they believe it's true for you too. And so getting really quiet and dealing with those head on, right? And with gentleness and compassion for yourself, and, ideally with somebody else supporting you, if not a whole group or community. Yeah, that's what I would say, because those are the strongest things that have come up for me trying to block me on my path. And when you deal with a belief, like, and you work really hard on it, because all of a sudden you're just like, oh, that just doesn't affect me the same way. Or, oh, I don't believe that anymore. Or, oh, I know that's not actually true. Like, I feel in my body that that's not the truth, right? Like, that's a limited perception, or someone told me that, or I got programmed with that. It's not really who I am.
Mm-hmm.
And that gets easier, but they come up a lot at the beginning, a lot about not being able to sustain yourself, make money, that we don't deserve to do the things that we, bring us the most joy, that we
Yeah.
don't deserve to play, that we don't deserve to be creative, that we don't have time. When all of that is not true, but it does take a rerouting and a restructuring of your day-to-day life to prioritize that.
Yeah, I like the grounding message I hear is like incubate yourself with what is going to nurture what you want to nurture, right? If you're going to deviate away from something that you've been doing your whole life or exploring something new, champion for yourself and make sure you're incubated by what's going to want what you want, right? Even if it's not what they would do, people don't need to do the same thing as you to be supportive of, oh, that's what you're after. Then I just want you to be happy with what makes you happy, right? Beautiful. So as we wrap this up here, gosh, there's so many things that you say that I'm like, that's a whole nother conversation, a whole nother conversation. I just am so enamored by you. I'm so inspired by you. I relate to you on so many levels that I didn't get the opportunity to learn until now. And I'm so grateful to have that connection with you on all these deep, deep levels and all these high, beautiful levels as well, all across the spectrum. What final thoughts would you like to add? It could be you expanding upon something you already said before, or something that maybe you want to people to have as a takeaway from this conversation.
I would say, starting with understanding that you're deserving of support, and you're worthy of creating a life that you love. I would say start there.
Your heart is beautiful, my friend. So as we wrap this up, the final questions I have for you are, what do you have coming up? Where can people get more of Lindsay?
Amazing. I have so many things in the works. Currently I have somebody working on a website. So that will be up in the next month. Currently I would share my Instagram, because that's probably the best way to reach out to me. It's just my first and last name, Lindsay Jerome, Lindsay, and then Jerome, Jerome. And then a few other things I have going on would include a virtual healing platform with two of my other classmates and friends, Christina and Kimmy, that we've been working on for the last 9 months or so, that we just launched. It's called Transcendent Wellness Collaborative. You can reach us at transcendentwellnesscollaborative.org, which brings you to our newsletter and our email subscription list. You can also skip straight to the community through transcendentwellnesscollaborative.com. There's different tiers that you're welcome to invest in and come in at wherever you're at on your healing journey and wherever your comfort level is at, including a free daily community, which is really helpful for meditations, affirmations, journal prompts, and just to get energy moving in the right direction. And get people kind of reflecting and thinking about different things and moving through life more consciously and intentionally. And from there, the tiers go up. There's one of, conscious awareness, which is the first one, conscious living, which is the second one, where you start to implement those things, conscious being, which is the more feminine. How do we be in our essence and really own that and not have to do to kind of, externalize our worth. And then the last one is conscious leadership, for people that feel called to really clarifying their purpose and how they want to bring that to the world. What is their purpose? What is their mission? How do they step into leadership most easily and effectively and efficiently, and do so from a loving space, right? Like a heart-centered space, a space of intentionality, of consciousness, and realizing they truly have an impact on the world. And lastly, I would say my Substack, it's called The Modern Mystic. And same thing, it's literally just my first and last name. For the link, lindsayjerome.substack.com, where I do a lot of my writing, which includes different energetics and tips for that. It also is like more personal anecdotes and things that I feel important to express both on a personal and collective level. And so that's where you can reach more of like my own personal work. And then reaching out for like one-on-one sessions via Instagram, or even following on there to see kind of what I post and what I'm about. And website will be up, in the coming months to actually do more one-on-one work. But the collaborative is a great place to start. It's a group container, sacred container community, remembering that things take a village and that we all deserve that support in a matriarchal way. And then also, yeah, my personal Substack, if you want to see any personal work that I'm working on writing wise, or for any tips or tricks that might help energetically.
Thank you so much. And for all of you, all of that will be in the show notes. You can send me the links for all of the programs and all that stuff, and I'll make sure it's all in there. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your heart and your emotions and your intellect and everything that you are. I felt every piece of you come through this today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shannon. I appreciate being here. And I'm very, very honored and flattered to have a space to express and share with you. So I appreciate that.
Thank you. And thank you as always for watching and or listening. Until next time, be good to yourself for fuck's sake. Live honestly in the dirty pretty of your life and choose to do the next right thing for you. Bye.